This lecture deals with some of the background story of Andrew Jackson's life, but mainly will focus on his presidency and some of the controversies surrounding it. So Jackson's going to be our really first different type of president. There can be a lot of comparisons made to him and Donald Trump and the fact that he's elected kind of by people who did not feel that they were served by previous presidents. So some of the things that make him different are that he was the first president from west of the Appalachian Mountains. Most of them were East Coasters, or at least relatively close. He's the first. He served in the first Tennessean to serve in the House of Representatives as Tennessee becomes a state. He's the first governor of Florida. He's the first person to serve as U.S. representative, senator, and president. He will exercise his veto power 12 times as president, which was more than everybody else combined before him. Many other presidents have used it more since, but before him at least. He was also the first president to articulate that the president, as president, they represented all of the people and the will of the majority must govern. So he's kind of different from Jefferson. Jefferson was talking about law more so than majority. He's going to talk about the majority. The will of the people must be heard more so. We'll get into populism around the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and he's kind of the first version of that. Andrew Jackson helped found and was the first president to represent the Democratic Party, where we get into this period known as Jacksonian democracy. Jackson is the only president to be censured by the U.S. Senate. Official criticism, and it was canceled in the last year of his presidency, but he was censured for some of the actions he will take. The first assassination attempt on a sitting president was made by him. It failed to kill him. He does actually shoot the president, but this president survives and is able to actually beat up his own assassin, or would-be assassin. And Andrew Jackson was the only president in American history to pay off the national debt and leave office with the country in the black, or actually making money. So he does have some positives as well. So there are really two views of Jackson. One is shown here as the common man, and the other one is shown in this political cartoon showing him standing on the Constitution as a king, or is he King Andrew? And that's kind of the question that a lot of people ask about his presidency. Most people, kind of debate this, but he does have aspects of both. So he is a very different president than we've had before. He's born on the North and South Carolinian border. His father died when he was a baby, and his brother will die in the American Revolution, and his mother dies not necessarily in the American Revolution, but kind of as a result of it, and he hates the British for both of their deaths and blames them. He's orphaned at 13. He has no formal education. He teaches himself to read and write. He doesn't actually like President Washington, which is somewhat different than most presidents before him. He called him an aristo, short for aristocrat or upper class, and the wealthy rule. So very different type of guy, and he will get himself into trouble with some of the things he says, very much like President-elect Donald Trump. So this image shows a drawing of the house that he grew up in, and this image will show the Hermitage, which is his house in Tennessee. So he will eventually become a wealthy, but he grows up in pretty dire poverty. So he was very emotional, arrogant, and passionate, again, somewhat similar to Donald Trump. He dueled. He could drink, smoke, and curse and fight with the best of them. He was a lawyer, judge, senator, general, and finally president. He's the first president of the left, elected of the West, and he appealed to the common man for several reasons. First of all, he's going to fight against Native Americans. Most of the wealthy people never had to deal with Native Americans because of them living closer to the coast and not by where the Native Americans were. He defeats the British at New Orleans in the War of 1812. After the War of 1812, James Monroe sends him to Florida to govern it, and he actually takes it over without the president's say-so for the United States, and his soldiers loved him because he was seen as kind of one of them, and they called him Old Hickory because he was very hard-nosed and worked hard. So Jackson is the first and most well-known president in this Jacksonian democracy. We were just leaving the Jeffersonian democracy with Thomas Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. Jefferson says of Jackson, when I was president of the Senate, he was a senator, and he could never speak on account of the rashness of his feelings. I have seen him attempt repeatedly as often choke with rage. His passions are no doubt cooler now, but he is a dangerous man. So Jackson and Jefferson did not agree, so that's why we kind of separate their democracies. Again, kind of similar to Donald Trump, some people view him as dangerous based on his emotional outbursts. So at this point in history, the country is vastly changing. You see the population density in 1790, mostly on the coast, and kind of in the northeast. And then we start to see a big population shift out west, and it becomes very politically powerful. We get more states, and we get more population density in those states. So Jackson appeals to the common man that are out in those states and the southern states. He's not going to be quite the same appeal as a Jefferson, because Jefferson was respected. Jackson is respected, but it's more because he is one of the common people, more so than Jefferson ever was. So how do we select who's going to run for president? From 1790 to 1828, there used to be caucuses everywhere. Some states still use this, where small groups of individuals would debate and choose a candidate for their party. From 1828 to 1900, we had conventions where members of the political parties nominated a candidate. We still have national conventions, but they're kind of a rubber stamp. They're not really important. And the current system for selecting political candidates is allowing all registered voters to participate in choosing a candidate. 1828 is going to be a key year politically for the United States. So what's going on in 1828? In the election of 1824, we see a turning point in presidential elections. Prior to 1824, electors, the people who actually elect the president, had been chosen by a caucus or convention. By 1824, the majority of states allowed voters to choose their presidential electors directly. So the people who are really electing the president are chosen by voters, giving more people, more of the common people, more power. So this is a difference between Jeffersonian democracy, where less people had power, and Jackson is all about more democracy, more power growing during this period 4 of AP. So Jackson is going to run against 4 different people in 1824, and he is going to lose this election by some shady standards. So in this 1824 Democratic-Republican caucus, they choose William Crawford, and others, John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, Henry Clay, and Andrew Jackson, all decided to challenge the nomination. Their opposition and their accusations that this system is undemocratic actually bring about the demise of the caucus system as we knew it then. And this is going to cause a massive change for 1828. So in 1824, John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson are the major opponents. They're both of the same political party, so that's why there's no party affiliation. So Jackson clearly wins the popular vote, 99 to 84, but he had to win the electoral vote as well. So there's 261 total electors. Jackson needed 131 to win the electoral vote in the election. Obviously, 99 is not enough, is not 131. So it is sent to the House of Representatives to choose the president. So anytime the electoral vote is not clear, it goes to the House of Representatives for them to decide. So in the House of Representatives, Henry Clay steps out of the race and throws his support and his supporters behind John Quincy Adams, the next closest candidate to Jackson. The House of Representatives choose Adams as the president, and 2 weeks later, Adams appoints Henry Clay as his Secretary of State, a very high-ranking official in the president's cabinet. So it looks pretty shady, and it gets called the corrupt bargain by Jackson and his supporters because he felt he won the most votes. Even though he didn't win 131, he should get the election. So this is going to cause a lot of feelings of Jackson being the victim, and a lot more people are going to come out and support him in 1828 against John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams is going to be very tainted by this, even though he is actually one of the a strong candidate for president. He tries to promote not only manufacturing and agriculture, but the arts, literature, and science, bringing new things into the American presidency. He lacked the common touch and refused to play the game of politics. He's not a very nice person. He's kind of cold, and he doesn't really, he seems obnoxious. He's actually a Federalist, and so he's the son of a Federalist president, so he's not going to be very popular there. He calls himself a Democratic Republican, but he doesn't really follow all their policies, and he doesn't build any popular support for his programs because he can't schmooze. So he's not a very good people person, so that will be kind of the downfall of his presidency. Also, that he's kind of the president under some iffy circumstances with the corrupt bargain. So as he kind of shows more of his Federalist leanings, more congressmen actually had initially supported Jackson, so he's not going to have to be able to work with Congress. He was seen as a more successful Secretary of State. He was a prior Secretary of State, so we thought he should stay that way. Every effort he made to strengthen the central government was viewed with deep suspicion because most of the country is Democratic Republican. He's not popular, and he fails to relate to the common man, so that's going to leave the common man feeling like their president doesn't represent them. They're going to want a common man as president, especially when he supports protective tariffs, the Bank of the United States, and internal improvements, all federalist ideas, not part of the Democratic-Republican ideology. And because of this, we start to see a split in the Democratic Republicans. Now we will get the Democrats with Jackson and Calhoun, mostly Southerners and Westerners, more similar to the ideas of Jeffersonian democracy, states' rights, restraint on economic social affairs of the federal government, favored liberty of the individual, and protected the common man. National Republicans kind of seem more like they're federalists. A strong national government favored the Bank of the United States, wanted the best and privileged to run the government more so the common man. These are your political elite in the National Republicans, and the Democrats are seen as the common man's party. Ironically, that kind of switches in today's standards where the Republicans are seen more the common man and the Democrats are seen as the elites. So in 1828, we have another election, Jackson versus the sitting president, John Quincy Adams. Jackson's political campaign accused Adams of hiring a servant girl to pose as a visiting Russian ambassador. Adams was accused of gambling in the White House, so we see a lot of mudslinging that doesn't really have to do much with policy, much like we just saw in the election of 2016. Jackson's wife was referred to as a bigamist because she was actually not officially divorced from her first husband as she when she married Jackson. It's one of the worst U.S. history elections for mudslinging. We're throwing insults at each other. An anti-Jackson newspaper said that his mother was a common prostitute brought to this country by British soldiers, and it talks about mixing of race. So lots of dangerous rhetoric in this that we will see again, obviously, in 2016. Not only does Jackson have issues with his own wife being called a bigamist, but Peggy Eaton was the wife of one of Jackson's secretaries, the Secretary of War, and who was the target of malicious gossip by the other cabinet wives. Jackson became her champion and stood up for her because of what happened to his wife, Rachel, because she actually dies, and Jackson always blamed the press for putting a lot of pressure on her with this bigamist stuff. She's going to die early in his presidency, and he kind of protects Peggy Eaton, showing he's, again, kind of the common man protecting someone who's being attacked by other people. So, as a result, Jackson says, hey, cabinet members, you have to treat this Miss Eaton well socially. Most of the cabinet actually resigns. His vice president, Calhoun, resigns and goes back to South Carolina. Jackson creates the kitchen cabinet, which were informal advisors, Jackson's good old boys. So you're seeing a lot of infighting, a lot of instability in his White House, which is what a lot of people are saying about Donald Trump as well. So again, a lot of similarities between the two. So now Jackson will actually be elected president. We already talked about some of the social issues he has with Peggy Eaton and his wife. So in 24 versus 28, we see a large amount of people voting more so than they did in 1824. This has a lot to do with who's allowed to vote, but also the idea that Andrew Jackson gets a lot of support from those common men in 1828. You see there's also still a divide between North and South and sectionalism, but Jackson is going to hold the West and the South substantially compared to John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams will lose the presidency. We see that there's different qualifications for voting. Very few states had property qualifications. Some states had taxpayer qualifications, and there's more states that actually have universal white male suffrage. That as long as you are a citizen of the United States, you can actually vote in this country. So that is growing. So the country is growing democratically, and Jackson's going to pick up on that. So you see a massive increase in the amount of voters between 1824 and 1860, and that really starts in 1828 because of Andrew Jackson and because of some of the voting requirements that had been lessened in many states prior to that 1828 election. So Jackson gets a lot of people who vote for him who wouldn't have voted earlier. Opponents of Jackson would say he gets the mob out, but thousands of commoners come to Washington, D.C. and feel that they now have a president who represents them. So we see common men supporting him. He's supported by the planter elite of the South, state politicians, immigrants, Northeastern establishment, monopolies, and privilege. He didn't like them. His heart and soul was with the plain folks, so a lot of people who did not have a lot of money. He felt that the common men were capable of uncommon achievements, and therefore they support him. So you see Jackson versus Jeffersonian democracy, lots of different ideas. They basically believe government